Welcome to God is Open. I'm your host, Christopher Fisher. Today on God is Open, we're going to be talking about Sun and Steel, a book by Yukio Mishima. I think I'm saying that right. But do you know anything about Mishima, the author?
I don't know a whole lot of his history. It's clear that he lived through World War II, though, in Japan.
Right. So the screenwriter of Taxi Driver, he makes all these like movies about loner men, and he adapted the life of Mishima into like a four-stage movie. And so that would be an interesting movie to watch at some point. He was an individual who served in the Japanese army during World War II, and he tried to lead revivalism of traditional Japanese culture. And so he got big into bodybuilding, and eventually he struck out and tried to throw a coup against the new government and reinstitute traditional Japanese emperor type government. But that failed, and he committed suicide with the seppuku.
Yeah, seppuku.
When he's about 45, something like that. So he's an acclaimed author. He's very introspective. He has a lot of fiction, but this is not one of his fiction works. This work is a work about introspection, about how he views the world, views himself, views his body in relation to the world, views words, how we write, and how we think of literature and art and those types of things. That's what we're reading here. So what were your initial impressions reading the first half of this book?
Uh, so I thought it was interesting that like he makes parallel. 'Cause the sun and steel is symbolism. It's symbolism for the hardship and realities of life. I had the impression at first that he was trying to make a parallel because he discusses how he's conflicted between the world of the mind and the words that you have to use to express everything, but then actually just going outside and existing and building up your body in a way that can match your mind and maybe even fortify your mind through physical strength. So the sun and the steel at first looked like a parallelism between the differences between mind and body and how to bring health to both. Although, as I got to the middle, it's clear that he actually is somewhat contemptuous about language itself.
Yes. So he started off as a good Platonist where he viewed words as abstract ideals and the body as something wholly unrelated. And so
Mhm.
as he grew and developed in his mindset, he kind of figured out that the body has some sort of link to the abstract. And so he set upon this introspective goal of perfecting his body so he could get in touch with some sort of higher reality. I would consider this
Mhm.
guy a reverse Platonist. And so, yeah, so like the Platonists of old, like Plotinus, they're like, oh, the material body is worthless. The material world is nothing, and we should forsake it all and seek the higher and try to ascend into the ether. And Porphyry records that Plotinus died all withered and frail. He didn't like eat very much food,
Mhm.
and he had like disease and he's died. And Mishima's like, listen, back in World War II, I was too weak and frail to die. That's an ignoble death. All these
Mhm.
people who are fat or skinny and frail, people who have poor physical outwards, that stuff is a reflection of the soul. And so he's like, I'm not going to die like that. I am going to work on perfecting my body. And in that way, I could try to reach the ideal spiritual essence,
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. To be clear, what he means by too weak and frail to die is that there's two basic ideas. One is that it is a like it allowed him to not fight in noble ways in noble occasions because he wasn't weak enough to be put in the circumstances in the first place. And so that's what he saw of himself in World War II. But he also has a more he has in his mind a vision of a noble death, and a noble death is something that you would see as heroic, where you should be dying in a way that is something that the stories are to be written about. But you can't be some fat slob who dies a heroic death. You have to have your body match it just to be able to be in a position where your death meant something. You had to be someone who is someone of strength, of power, who is fighting something, who is risking everything because he has a lot to lose, and he has every everything to fight against.
And so he starts out his writing about how language works, and he sees language as some sort of ideal that gets corrupted when it comes in contact with reality. And we could kind of understand that language is abstract. It doesn't quite
Mhm.
it communicate precisely the reality that we're trying to describe. There's some sort of chasm when we have discussions where we have to just present the gist of something, and recreating it in one's own mind and matching that to reality, there's going to be some loss in the transfer of information. Language is going to be imperfect for communication.
I mean, language is a funny thing. The idea behind it is that you try to come up with a commonality of concepts between a great many people, condense it into a very small symbol, so that, and then try to combine them in ways to express ideas that you couldn't express through experience itself. But the very notion of that is corrupting to the experience itself, because you're actually turning something unique, your experience, into something common just for the sake of communicating in the first place. And I think he was recognizing that very fact, that language itself has to distort the very thing that you experienced in order to try to express it.
Yeah, so he does have a passage. I don't have it pulled up right now, but basically describes how language, to the extent that people are lauded as excellent writers, they're writing in a unique way, which undoes the purpose of language, which is supposed to be a universal way to communicate.
Mhm.
And so there's something, some sort of antinomy or some sort of a subversion of the purpose of language in these type of writing exercises. And so very early in his life, he started to try to figure out if his experience of reality is shared among other people, and if we could whittle down to some sort of basis by which we can know that we have certain shared experiences. And an example he gives is some people carrying some sort of totem, some sort of shared exercise of physical exertion, and he sees one of the people staring into the sky, and he wonders what that guy is seeing in his vision, until he himself goes through that same experience, and just the weariness that brings upon him staring into the sky. He gets lost in the visions of the sky. He says it's a unique sky that he's never seen before or since, but that it wasn't some grand vision. It's just staring into the sky, something that he knows he has in common with that person, because of the shared physical activity whittles away the other introspective thoughts that we might be having. It pushes man to his basic self, and in that way, he said, "All men think like me." So I thought that was pretty funny. I don't think that all people think alike, but maybe him and his neighbors have some sort of shared experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like he's annoyed by the fact that no matter how much he tries to communicate an idea, he cannot do it. And so he needs to identify ways to actually find that shared experience if language is insufficient to do it. And what he comes up with, uh, at least as far like I only have my way into the middle of his book, but he decides that pain is the most real expression of life, because it is one of the most extreme experiences someone can endure, and it heightens everything about the senses.
Yeah, in those passages, I think that's in chapter 4, he talks about as soon as you got an opponent in front of you standing there with like a stick ready to beat you, all your introspection goes away. It's like
Hmm.
you're it's
Everything is reflexive.
you have to you're facing reality. So no matter what thoughts you have, when you get hit by that stick, you're going to feel some pain. And in
Hmm.
that sense, you know you exist and the abstract does not exist. The
Hmm.
abstract's not going to be able to reflect back and then stop that stick from hitting you and hurting you in some sense. That in that sense, the abstract does not translate to reality. So David writes, black shirts are actually the most real representation of life. Maybe not to Mishima, who talks very negatively about the dark and night. He talks about when he was a kid, there are people of the night who love night. Well, if you're in World War II and you're a soldier, you're going to love night because night is darkness. Night will stop snipers from shooting you. You're able to move at night. You're able to do things without fear of death. And he writes about his experiences in World War II where the sun would come up and the sun would reflect across the battlefield. It would reflect across the blood, reflect across all the shiny metal, the people's uniforms, the flies that are on the dead bodies, and the sun was associated with death. But he talks about how his experience started reversing. He started associating with the night and all the things that come along with the night. He started embodying until he figured out it was making him weak. And the people of the night, he looked at these people, the philosophers who philosophize by night, and they're weak people. He's very much into physiognomy, that how people act and behave is expressed outwardly, and it shows in their body, the way they're built, their facial expressions. And so in that sense, he's like, these people are weak. What are they telling us? Why should we listen to them? And I do got a meme that I pulled up a couple memes, and the first one's this one. I'll pull this over. Basically, kind of illustrating the idea that people who are inwardly ugly and miserable, that sort of thing starts expressing outwards. I mean, you've probably known fat people who are kind of ugly but are have a cheery disposition, and they're not as ugly. It's their inward self starts bearing on their outward. But you also might know very attractive people that look very ugly on the outside. Their inward soul is showing out. How people think is how they start to appear, and that's one of these ideas. He's all for maximizing the body as well. And so when you have health ministers, this is a famous meme, all the experts, the health ministers, and they're all pathetic people, they're weak people, they're people that are in terrible physical health, and they're trying to tell us to do things like get certain jabs, vaccines, things like that. And these people are just the most grotesque visions of human beings imaginable. It's almost like they're trying to lord us it over us. These people are your health ministers. Ha ha ha. You're going to have to do what they say or else. Look how we humble you. Look how much humiliation you go through being forced to listen to these people as your health ministers. It's like I wouldn't listen to these people for health advice. I'll tell you what, when we're growing up, I don't remember if you remember in school, they try to teach things like the food pyramid, which is just all complete lies. It was,
Yeah, it's arguably something that's designed to make you large, lethargic, like not very active or eager to do anything important.
right. So, like the Plains Indians were meat eaters, they were like 6 feet tall. And the South American Indians were farmers, they were more like 5 feet tall. In our food pyramid, they put the base as carbohydrates, breads, rice,
Mhm.
these types of things. They want it to be our staple food source rather than the meats, the eggs, the proteins. They said limit intake of these things. They inverted the pyramid. They're trying to build an unhealthy society, and these are the types of people pushing that sort of nonsense on us.
I do find it a bit interesting that the Dutch, and I've met quite a bit of Dutch now. They're one of the tallest groups of people in Europe. They were not one of the tallest groups of people in Europe, as far as I understand it, like 150 years ago. And I think a lot of their behaviors have helped them, but what I know, at least from their diet, is they basically just have about a sandwich for lunch every day. They eat simple food. They don't eat large amounts. Drink a bit of beer. But it's interesting to see the differences between what you're told is healthy, and what ends up actually being healthy. And as far as I can tell, grains are not all that vital in general for physical health.
Yeah, it seems to be the meats and the proteins, everything they told us to avoid. And all you have to do is look at someone to know whether or not to trust them. And it takes a real weak person to say, "Oh, that person doesn't have a PhD or a certain document. They can't just look at them. Do you want to look like them? Do they look healthy? Do these other people look healthy?" Okay, I got this clip here from a show. Yeah, we should watch it real quick. I found it while I was pulling up clips for this episode.
Julius, you're a fitness trainer. What do you think of Jenny and Dorothy being happy with their bodies?
I think that's fantastic. Are you healthy? Have you been to the doctors and they've told you that you're healthy?
Well, I think that's quite a loaded question because I don't think anyone here who's thin is going to be asked that. So I guess that's what I would say to that answer, that we have to look as well at the assumptions that are made. And I would say you can't actually tell someone's lifestyle or health by looking at them. I do think that there's such a health focus in our country that I call it healthism, a kind of moral obligation for people to be healthy. And I think that we have to watch that too.
But isn't that because it costs taxpayers a lot of money if the population isn't healthy? People have to go to hospital, they have various kinds of diseases. Isn't that part of the reason why there's that focus?
That poor guy, he's just like looking, he's like,
he's smart enough to not know. He's smart enough to know not to say things, even though he very much is thinking certain things.
yeah, you can see it in his face. He's just like, oh, okay, yep, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely understand a person's life and their decisions and what they can handle by how they look.
So Mishima, and I think this is completely valid, he found that his mental faculties, ability to process information, started changing as he worked out his body. That your physical changes lead to mental changes, and the two they're linked in some fashion, and linked in a real way. I pulled up a study. Let's see if I still got that pulled up somewhere. But the study was basically saying that Democrats who are given testosterone start leaning right.
Yeah, like all the BuzzFeed people had zero testosterone in them.
Man, that was terrible. I do got that somewhere as well. They had less testosterone than like a 60-year-old man. And so testosterone administration induces a redshift in Democrats, and they use a placebo group and a non-placebo group to try to figure that out.
Yeah, it seems like cities in general engender a lack of testosterone because people are more sedentary and they're just traveling together in groups. They're also, I think testosterone is also boosted by competitiveness, and people try to be more collaborative and accommodating when you're in larger groups. So there's something about cities in general that just sort of strips men of what they're built to be.
Yeah, it's you don't get out, you don't get hiking, you don't get in the sun, you don't get. I spent today gardening and pulling weeds and putting down liner to stop. And then I come in, I'm exhausted and I'm sweaty and I need to shower. I'm dirty. There's dirt everywhere. You just don't get that in the big cities. So Roddy says it makes Christians really angry when you say Christians should not be overweight. They get super spiritual platitudes like, "Oh, we're going to get new bodies," which it's a few things about that. One, he has a great quote where he talks about how fatness is an outward sign of an inward, like a depravity of soul. It's like a depravity of willpower. Like you can't stop yourself from eating. And the Bible is so very much against sloth. It's very much against lust and envy
Gluttony.
and gluttony, becoming fat. And so it might not, it might be okay to have a bad body, but it represents something deeper on a spiritual level to let it all go down.
A little bit of defense, just not of Christians in general, but in the modern situation, is that all the food that we have is built in a way to maximize sugar content, minimize nutrition. We are now in modern times kind of walking on landmines. And so people end up getting fat, and then because they didn't learn nutrition properly and learn that you have to avoid most of what's out there, they get defensive because in ways they're a bit helpless to do anything about it.
Yeah, David David points out fat church ladies worrying about me smoking cigars. It is real funny. It's very selective, and I think it's selective for a reason that women tend to be fatter than men, and so smoking's easier for them to crack down on because then it's something they can fight and not be a hypocrite about. It doesn't take as much willpower to avoid. I remember I went to Summit Ministries, and there was this. This was back before cell phones and stuff like that, and so I was by the pay phones or whatever to call out. And there was a girl crying on the phone. I didn't know she was crying for, but it turns out she was getting bullied by the Christians there because she was a smoker, and it's like these girls bullying her for smoking. Your body is a temple. They're all fat. They're all fat, and they're bullying her. And she left, and it became a big thing, and everyone had to sign a little, "We're sorry for bullying you for smoke." That's like smoking. It's like, you know what? Smoking is an appetite suppressant. So if I had to pick between one of them for a lady, that would be smoking. But yeah, that's interesting. And smoking's not as dangerous as they've beat into our minds that it is. So it's not.
Yeah, it is interesting to see that the lung cancer rates have stabilized. So
yeah, well,
there are plenty of other causes of lung cancer than smoking.
Back in the day, I wrote a bit article on it for the college newspaper, and I said the cancer rates in Greece are like non-existent, and everyone smokes. And the CDC or whatever said, "Oh, that's because they have a healthy lifestyle. They do a lot of walking and fruit." So instead of telling Americans you could smoke as long as you have a healthy lifestyle, eat a lot of fruit and stuff like that, they just say, "Let's just cancel the smoking and get rid of that." It's like, you guys, it's just terrible. Anyways.
Well, I mean, this is what I mean, though, is that especially in the U.S., a lot is stacked against people that lead to them being fat, and it's important to be healthist or whatever that woman said on the video in order to counteract that, because it's so ubiquitous, and which makes it so easy to get fat. And I don't know how else you're going to do it besides really pointing out that this is not like this is a reflection of how you think. This changes the amount of energy you have in the day and your ability to do basic chores, to be able to think, to be able to build things, to be able to go to places, to be able to explore. Like you can't go on vacations and stuff because you have to walk everywhere. So it completely changes the kind of life you live.
Yeah, so he talks about perfecting his body. He says they also, it seems, fulfill the function of taking revenge on and correcting any excessive eccentric idea. When he says this sentence, what he means is that if we have eccentric ideas about what's true and what's false, it will manifest in the body. And he writes, "I had always felt that such signs of physical individuality as a bulging belly, a sign of spiritual sloth, or flat chest with protruding ribs, someone who's like frail, is a sign of unduly nervous sensibility. Were excessively ugly. Both those things were excessively ugly. And I could not contain my surprise when I discovered that there were people who loved such signs." He's talking about like people like the Platonists or the people who are like, "Oh, That guy is
Yep.
such a good philosopher. Look at him. He's
Yeah.
oh,
Look at Gandhi. The frail, completely helpless guy who barely ate.
oh Gandhi.
He's the spiritual leader, right?
Oh man, yeah, it's like people who elevate Gandhi to some sort of like he is this Mishima is the anti-Platonist. He's like,
Yeah.
perfect your body and you will perfect your soul. He says, I discovered there are people who love such signs. To me, these could only seem acts of shameless indecency, as though the owner were exposing his spiritual pudenda on the outside of his body. They represented one type of narcissism that I could never forgive. And so he rightly points out that these types of things, Gandhi was a narcissist, and people like this are narcissists, and they care entirely about themselves. They're lazy, they're slothful, they think highly of themselves more so than is actually deserved. All right, so I'll keep rolling on here. Oh man, here's the passage about the sun. He said that same sun, as the days turned to months and the months to years, had become associated with a pervasive corruption and destruction. In part, it was the only way it gleamed so encouragingly on the wings of planes leaving on missions, on forests of bayonets, on badges of military caps, on embroidery of military banners, but still more, far more, it was the way it glistened on the blood flowing ceaselessly from flesh, and on the silver bodies of flies clustering on wounds, holding sway over corruption, leading youth in droves to its death in tropical seas and countrysides. The sun lorded over it, that vast, rusty red ruin that stretched way to the distant horizon. So as a military man, the sun was associated with death. And then he gradually started seeing the sun as his friend after the war. He says there are the men who indulged the night. The men who indulged in nocturnal thought, it seemed to me, had without exception dry, lusterless skins and sagging stomachs. They sought to wrap up a whole epoch in capacious night of ideas and rejected it in all its forms, the sun that I had seen. They rejected both life and death as I had seen them. For in both of these, the sun has had a hand. So he likes to talk about life, living, vitality. So just like the Bible, you're going to see a lot of light imagery. The sun is the good thing. And within the Bible, the night is the bad thing. The night conceals evil acts. The sun brings light to things. The sun brings life, vitality. That's what he's going for. And he's pressing against these people who prefer the dark, prefer the night, prefer the waking hours.
Yeah, one of the interesting concepts that he does bring up with the sun is that the sun beats down on people too. But he points out that is it actually reshapes you. Like many kinds of trials and endurance you go through, to be able to endure the sun is to endure as a way to strengthen yourself. And so it ends up not being a negative whatsoever, but something that builds character to be out in it rather than hiding away at night to all your gluttonies.
Yeah, he says, who pays attention to a physical education theorist grown decrepit? Yeah, who cares about what these meme people tell us? Who themselves are
They've never been outside.
Yeah, disgusting people, and they're telling us health advice and telling us how to live. It's like those are not the lives we want to emulate. Those are not the people that we want to be. They should not have any position in which they're telling people these things. And so he talks about how there is a sense in which both the spiritual and the physical have involuntary aspects. Like our circulatory system, we don't control. We just breathe, and we breathe naturally. So even the physical world, we don't have tangible experience with. It's not something that we could control. It's something that's maybe imposed on us. And spiritually as well, our mind is forced to do certain things in the same way. And so his goal in training the body, you could train your muscles to do things. There's those guys at the gym who do those little pec flexes or whatnot. because through constant effort and training, you're able to take control voluntarily of what otherwise would be involuntarily involuntary. The same with the mind. And so he sees a real parallel between training his mind to think and training his body to lift. And both of those things take gradual, continual effort. It takes focus and dedication over long periods of time. There's no quick solutions for these things.
Yeah, I think it's important when he talks about building his muscles that he actually seeks to find a balance between the aesthetic look of muscles, but also the function. He doesn't want to dive too heavily into one or the other. And so the idea of the steel is that he's actually building his muscles to meld steel, and that he's actually making a practical application of his body in building his muscles. And he found that sense of purpose that he gave his muscles actually had a significant effect on how he's building his muscles and the actual consequential thoughts that correspond to that when your mind is bent towards a goal and your body then becomes the vehicle that you use towards that goal, that itself is what keeps you from living in flights of fancy. And so what he really does not like, and he keeps trying to guard himself through in the book, is this idea that his imagination is going to carry him away to something unreal. And he doesn't want to disappear too far in any given fanciful world. And in order to do that, he has to keep himself focused on real tasks.
Yeah, so his goal is like the essential or the ultimate or the pinnacle of real experience rather than the imagination. He's hyper focused on reality. In that way, he's not a Platonist either, who tries to escape the body to have some sort of metaphysical extent or something like that. Mishima disclaims drugs. He's like, you don't do drugs or anything like that to try to get these experiences. Try to stay focused in the real world, people.
But he doesn't disclaim pain, and so he uses pain as the sense of drugs, where it's becomes something real, and it exists for a reason, as opposed to drugs, which actually still carries you away into nothingness. I do find it interesting. So basically, at least as far as I've gotten, he seems to be what's considered a phenomenologist, except when I understand phenomenologists in a religious context, it's mostly this idea that you can never express what seeing God is like, because it is so unique that no words will ever capture it. And so I was initially completely opposed to an idea of phenomenologist, but he's not taking this in a metaphysical perspective so much as a personal experiential perspective, where he can never get to the point where words are really the vehicle to capture an idea. You have to go live it. And I think that's a much more healthier way to be more of a phenomenologist. But there are dangers to going too far in that way too. And so I think you need to be a little wary about what he's doing too. There are times to stop back and to introspect. And I think at least what he's been describing, he is so deeply eschewing language as a proper vehicle that I think it's starting to do harm.
I do like how he describes his interaction with steel, his gradual lifting, his muscles turning into the steel that he himself is lifting. The more he lifts it, the more he sees connections between his muscles and the inert steel. And let's read what he says over here. Where did that run off to? Oh, to revive the dead language, the discipline of steel was required. To change the silence of death into the eloquence of life, the aid of steel was essential. He's a vitalist. He wants to live a full and meaningful life. He wants to create his body, his mind, his soul into the pinnacle of classic conceptions. That's one of the things he talks about language, that language is ideal. And so he's set to make his body as close to that ideal as possible, knowing that he'll never reach that ideal state. but just the fact that he's doing it is giving him something that these other people aren't. He says, the steel faithfully taught me to correspond between the spirit and the body, thus feeble emotions. It seems to me correspondedly to flaccid muscles, sentimentality to sagging stomach, and over impressionability to oversensitive white skin. More
Yeah,
physiognomy.
yeah. Later on in the book, he says that at a certain point, he becomes so his sense of self becomes so attached to his current muscles that they disappear entirely, because it's no longer a new thing that he's built. It is actually a part of who he is, and so his mind has been conformed in such a way that his whole very sense of being is built into what his goals are at that point.
Another way that he rejects Platonism is that he talks about our body being like fleeting perfection. He talks about how Greek statues take a snapshot in time of when we have youthful vigor, but we ourselves can be in a fleeting moment of time within our lives, just a fluid perfection that's dynamic. I think that's within the first 4 chapters. I don't think it's outside of it. But yeah, is this what you're talking about, where his cooling muscles in the breeze and the sweat vanished as though by magic, coolness passed over the surface of the muscles. Next instant, I was rid of the sense of the muscles' existence. And in the same way that words, by their abstract functioning, can grind up the concrete world so that worlds themselves seem never to have existed. My muscles at that moment crushed something within my being so that it was though the muscles themselves had similarly never existed. So he's saying words themselves can never adequately describe reality, and our physical being itself in the same way doesn't have interaction with fundamental reality. That both of them create this, can crush it and turn it into like a non-experience or something like that. Is that what you're getting from that?
Yeah, because it's no longer it's no longer in the forefront of who he is. It's been condensed at that point. I mean, that was the takeaway I had from it.
Oh, here's a green highlight.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, it's green. It means it's important. In actual fact, words, armed with their abstract function, originally put in their appearance as a working of the logos, designed to bring order to the chaos of the world of concrete objects. I'd say he's correct there, that language wants to build in our mind pictures of reality that we could transfer to other people and have them recreate it. The expression was essentially an attempt to turn the abstract functioning back on itself, like an electric current that flows in reverse, summon up a world of phenomena with the aids of words alone. We communicate to try to tell the other person something meaningful that they can reconstruct in their own mind.
Yeah, but you can only do that through a sort of common understanding of the meaning of words. And so sense of order between all those words. And so it's an interesting idea. Words become both the way that you bind people together, but it's also limiting for any kind of experience itself. Words will never get you to the experience on its own. I do find it interesting, though, that words will create experiences that you can never experience personally. It'll create senses of ideas that go off in directions of non-realities, and that is the very thing that he's disgusted with words, that they can pervert what truth is in the first place through those flights of fancy.
Right. He has this whole paragraph where he is basically criticizing imagination. How often have men escaped from the pains of their own bodies with the aid of sentimental aspect of the imagination that feels the ills of others' flesh at its own? And how often has the imagination unquestioningly exalted spiritual sufferings whose relative value was in fact excessively difficult to gauge? And when this type of arrogance of the imagination links together the artist's act of expression and accomplices, there comes into existence a kind of fictional thing, the work of art. And it is this interference from a large number of such things that has steadily perverted and altered reality. As a result, men end up by coming into contact only with shadows and lose the courage to make themselves at home with the tribulations of their own flesh. I don't think he's going to like, he would have liked video games very much. I don't know.
No.
Just throwing that out there.
I don't think he'd like modern Japan very much.
Well, yeah, that was his whole goal, is to bring
Yeah.
Japan back to something traditional.
Mhm.
This is to stop anime from happening. He would have been the guy. So he talks about, this is the chapter that he starts talking about his physical combat. And the physical combat actually introduced a third party into his imaginations. And this third party, because this third party existed, it was able to teach him that there's this outside reality, that the realm of ideas, the realm of ideas just doesn't interact the same way. The realm of ideas doesn't do anything when someone's hitting you with a bamboo sword. You're just going to get hurt, and none of your ideas are going to stop it. He says it was the opponent that lurked in the empty space beyond the flash of the fist and the blow of the fencing sword, gazing back at one that constituted the true essence of things. Ideas do not steer back. Tilings do. Yeah, you get hit by a sword, you're going to know that you're hit by a sword. You're going to say, ouch. Yes, that sword actually exists. That was an experience. I did experience that thing. It hurt. So maybe he's like Descartes, but he's like, I hurt, therefore I am.
Well, no question. That's what he says. That's why he says pain is the very definition of life. That's how extreme he gets to it. That is the truest understanding of who you are.
Yeah, I think he gets to in another chapter about how when you start training for fighting and you start interacting with that individual, you're in some subconscious level reacting spontaneously, predictively, without thinking about it, without processing these thoughts, and you almost have to like see the future to figure out what the person's going to do and react with enough time. And so I don't think that's this chapter, but one that's coming on. So he writes, the cynicism that regards all hero worship. This is one of my favorite passages.
This is a very good one. Yeah.
Yes. He says the cynicism that regards all hero worship as comical is always shadowed by a sense of physical inferiority. Invariability, it is the man who believes himself to be physically lacking in heroic attributes who speaks mockingly of the hero. And when he does, how dishonest it is that his phraseology, partaking ostensibly of a logic so universal and general, should not, or at least should be assumed by the general public not to, give any clue to his physical characteristics. I have yet to hear hero worship mocked by a man endowed with what might justly be called heroic physical attributes. Facile cynicism invariably is related to feeble muscles or obesity, while the cult of the hero and a mighty nihilism are always related to a mighty body and well-tempered muscles, for the cult of the hero is ultimately the basic principle of the body, and in the long run is intimately involved with the contrast between the robustness of the body and the destruction that is death. You do see that it is typically the weak people who are criticizing and disparaging people who are healthy and fit. Like in Twitter right now, the right-wing bodybuilder types, who's criticizing these guys? Typically weak people who are...
It's the neckbeards.
Neckbeards or people who get into transgenderism because they didn't succeed at their original gender, so they're going to try out a new gender. Now there's some weird freak of nature that is just criticizing these like Adonis built bodybuilders who put in a lot of time and effort. So that's the thing about it. It takes a lot of time and effort. It takes a long-term vision. It's not something that is just given to these people. Sure, genetics plays a role, but if you're seeing someone who's fit like that, if there's not a shortcut, there's no shortcut to get there. It tells you something about their character and who they are. and it's something that we shouldn't just dismiss as if it was nothing. They just got that for free. So I do like that, and I don't disparage quote unquote hero worship.
Yeah, I think hero worship is kind of, it's something that people tend to gravitate towards in a lot of ways. They want to build up something outside of themselves, and they want to see people struggle against great things. Later in the book, I keep coming back to this, but it is a keen thing in his ideas that he says you cannot have a hero without the specter of death being your ultimate enemy. Death is, like, no matter how you're going to couch it up in your story or in what happens in reality, you are fighting against death when you are being a hero. You want to break it. And so to be a hero means that you have to have the strength to resist it against all things. And the weak, those people with the physical ailments, they are halfway there already, and being spiteful towards those who can have the strength to resist it.
Yeah, he writes, the thing that ultimately saves the flesh from becoming ridiculous is the element of death that resides in the healthy, vigorous body. It is this, I realize, that sustains the dignity of the flesh. How comic would one find the gaiety and elegance of the bullfighter were his trade entirely divorced from the associations of death? Yeah, if the bullfighters, there's no death involved, what's he doing? What's going on there? It's not a noble cause. It's not a spectator sport anymore. There's no stakes, right? It's like if you're watching a movie and it's a Marvel movie or something, and no one's gonna die. The good guys are gonna win, and they try to do a fake death scene, or you're like, what are we watching? What am I watching here? Why are we watching this movie? Why did you guys put that in? Everybody knows that you're just trying to fake us. Fool me 20 to 25 times, shame on me. Fool me 50 to 100 times, shame on you. I don't know.
On me again.
Yeah, on me again. Just shame on all the people watching those Marvel movies. Or, oh, guess what? The good guys win again.
Yeah. Yeah, there are no risks, and that's by design with those movies, because they're trying to constantly monetize them. They're not willing to write any story that creates the real specter. But he has disdain for even the stories that do, because he finds them to be, in the sense that they are a story in the first place, creates some, immortalizes them, is what he says. And so by turning it into a story, it is sort of a living dead thing, where should you even see the death or risk the death in it, it by the sense of it being a story, will never die. It cannot die. And so he sees that in itself as not true risk, true death, true heroism.
Yeah,
You
so
can only get that through reality. You cannot get that through the words themselves.
right. He does distinguish between like an intellectual courage and then a physical courage. And he writes about physical courage. The acceptance of suffering as proof of courage was a theme of primitive initiation rites in the distant past. All such rites were at the same time ceremonies of death and resurrection. Men have by now forgotten the profound hidden struggle between the consciousness and the body that exists in courage, and physical courage in particular. Consciousness is generally considered to be passive, and the active body to constitute the essence of all that is bold and bold. Probably sometimes there's spelling errors in this. Bold and daring. Yet in the drama of physical courage, the roles are in fact reversed. And so I do like how it could be written for a modern audience. This is maybe like 80 years ago, something like that. It could be written for a modern audience that they don't experience physical courage. They don't go out and do heroic things. How many people have had combat experience? And even if you had combat experience, is going into Iraq and just driving in a Humvee, and then is that the same thing as the World War I or World War II type of people who are fighting hand-to-hand combat in very very adverse circumstances where Ukraine fighters, these videos coming out of Ukraine, that's real war. People just get killed and destroyed. And so you're not seeing too much of that these days. Real physical courage, and all those people who are fighting in Ukraine willingly have real physical courage. I won't either side. There's something there's something that you have to admire about even like the American mercenaries or people joining either side, going to go do like a George Orwell and go fight for some sort of abstract ideal, that sort of thing. And I think Mishima would have encouraged that sort of stuff, that sort of will to succeed in these environments. All right, to embrace the suffering is a constant role of physical courage, and physical courage is, as it were, the source of the taste for understanding and appreciating death. That, more than anything else, is a prime condition for making true awareness of death possible. However, much of the closeted philosopher mulls over the idea of death, so long as he remains divorced from the physical courage that is a prerequisite for any awareness of it, he will remain unable to even begin to grasp it. He's criticizing modern philosophers. Oh, they just sit in their boarding schools. They haven't ever experienced near-death experiences. They haven't experienced anything tasking on their body. And they're all philosophizing about death. They don't know anything about death. These people are like the fat people who their bodies show who they are. We shouldn't listen to them about these things. They just don't. They cannot grasp the things that later in the book he reads letters from men who go to war, that's in like a museum, people from the Japanese suicide squads, and these are men who know they're going to die. And so that's a very impactful passage in his book. But I don't think that these philosophers sitting in their ivory towers know anything about death. He says, insofar as that manliness was no longer of any practical use in society, it was scarcely distinguishable from art that depended solely on imagination. And of course, he hates imagination. He says, I didn't highlight it. Imagination. I detest
it. Yeah.
Yeah, so he doesn't like imagination. So that concludes chapter 4. We'll do a part 2 where we go 5 through 10. But it's an interesting book. It's interesting in this is like normal philosophy where the people just write their thoughts on paper. One of these things you learn after college is that these philosophers are just people who are just writing their thoughts down. They're just like journalists. And so this is like his journal about him exploring his body and how his body and mind function and how that deals with the world of abstract words. And it's interesting. It's inspirational. I listened to this while jogging. There's a whole YouTube audio book that's available. And so if you jog 6 miles, that's like an hour. All you have to do is a couple weeks of 6 miles each, and then you're through the book. But it's inspirational what he talks about, his dedication, and his dedication could be of use to young men. If young men show the same sort of dedication he has to weightlifting and applies it to their own life in their own endeavors, they could make themselves anything they want to, basically.
Yeah, we are far too pushed over the edge in terms of what is fanciful, what is imaginative, and not too much in what is real. And I think this is a good counterbalance to that. He takes, by pointing out that you cannot be healthy without experiencing reality, and and there are ways you can do that systematically in ways that will make you grow, and your mind will be shaped by that in ways that you will appreciate. It is a very important thing, I think, for men in general to be lifting weights and to try to lift heavy weights that cause a bit of suffering when you're first lifting it, but it builds you up in a way where you have more power than you realize. one of the most important things, I think, for any man at one point in his life is just to see what kind of peak you can get to, because you don't really know the full extent of what's possible for yourself if you don't get to that peak physically. And that physical, it's not like you're dedicating yourself to the physical as a way of avoiding the mental, as a way of avoiding the philosophical. Your mind is more energetic because you built up that energy with your physical body. They are tied together. Your metabolism is tied very much directly to your physical body, your shape, your perception of yourself. It's not some irrelevant thing. It is not some surface thing. It builds you up.
And he's writing before all the studies about testosterone and the beneficial effects of spending time in the sun and the chemicals and stuff like that. He intuits it because of his observation. He's a very observant person. If I do this, then this happens, and these are the effects. Yeah, there are good side effects, main effects of going outside, spending time outside, going on hikes, going swimming, taking the kids on runs through the neighborhood, something like that. Just getting out and actually doing things in real life rather than sitting behind a screen all day and just absorbing information. That what do we do with all this information? What is the purpose? Yeah, sun is good. There's a guy that keeps posting on the God is Open. And he's like, God is so bad because people go outside and the sun is terrible and gives them skin cancer. And I'm always like, go outside, dude. Put the computer down and go outside in the sun.
Yeah, you can't get the experience of the sun by having vitamin D pills. You have to actually go, because the health benefits are beyond whatever those pills are. You must go outside at some point.
Yeah.
It's important. I go on walks quite a bit. I think they're very valuable. I think being outside, just being outside, is valuable in general.
Yeah. So
And
I
don't think I do it enough, in all honesty. I have a lot to learn and a lot of ways to grow, but I recognize that it is very important for your growth.
Yeah, and probably a good thing to get your kids into as well. Try as I might, my daughter's like, I'm like, let's go running, and she's like, she doesn't want to go running. Like, come on, let's do it. It'll be good. Just 1 mile. But yeah, so we'll do a part 2. I think he's interesting as a person. I think he's basically a reverse Platonist. He prioritizes the body, the physical, of the mental, maximization. He's not a dump stat guy. There's no dump stats with this guy. He pushes everything to the max as far as he can get it, and he tries to become the ultimate person. He's a vitalist, is how I would describe him. He loves life. He cares about life. He thinks that life is worth living, and he's got a value system that he seeks to embody, mind and soul. And so he is admirable as an individual. And he tried to overthrow the government of Japan, so I guess that's a plus as well. But all right, well, so we'll cut there, and we'll probably do a part 2 sometimes, and we'll have to figure out when that is. But well, thanks for coming, and thanks for talking this through. And everyone can find this book, the audio version, on YouTube. The full thing is just like 2.5 hours, so it's not terribly long. You could knock it out in a day. And I listened to it like multiple times because it's pretty dense stuff. It's like, okay, what's he saying here? What's he saying there? So a couple readings might be in the cards. But all right, John, thanks for coming. Any questions, comments, put that down below, or start a thread on the God is Open Facebook page. Thanks for listening.
Take care.